I am Jim Preston.
So, thank you, Jim, for being willing to come and talk to us. I'm excited to hear some of your story because I don't know if we really had a conversation with that. And I appreciate your years of service here at this church. I mean, you've been on trustees, you've been on the deacon board, you've served a lot of capacities. And I know we've been through some building projects, and
Mhm.
hopefully we'll have one here soon that we can see completed. But first thing I want to ask you is, what was your life before you became a Christian?
Um, well, my mother was a Christian. My father was a Christian. Um,
Where did you guys go to church?
well, my dad had been a member down at the Congregational Church there
Okay.
on Main Street,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom was a Methodist and went to St. Mark's
Okay.
when I was little.
Yeah.
And the thing is, with my mom being sick and my dad working, we just attended sporadically. Uh, you know, we might be able to attend 3 or 4 weeks, and then might not be able to attend for 2 or 3 weeks. But I always, my mom kept the Bible laying on the table in the living room, and it was well worn, and I heard a lot about it, and I understood that there was Jesus, and that there was God, and that God was always watching over us and caring for us. I just never really fully understood the importance of the relationship till I got older.
Uh-huh.
And then,
I like your. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I like the idea of that worn Bible.
yeah,
That's evidence right there, isn't it?
yeah. Um, as I got older, there was an emptiness. And then when I went to work, I worked with a guy who was a very, very strong Christian. He had the Bible memorized. He could tell you, well, verse such and such talks about this, just right off the top of his head. And he witnessed to me a lot and talked to me, and we ended up carpooling together.
Oh,
And it was in the fall of 1980 when I really, committed my life to Christ.
yeah. So
And
I'm sure he was one of the people that kind of helped influence you. That
oh
then,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's kind of neat how God brought that man into your life. What
yeah.
was his name?
Charlie Burwinkle.
Okay. And so, I mean, did you guys have deep conversations on the way
Oh
to
yeah,
work?
oh
And
yeah, yeah. We used to talk a lot about Ezekiel 38 and 39, and about the Book of Revelations, and talked about the end times, and the importance of salvation, and yeah, we had some fairly deep conversations.
yeah. So, what were some of those circumstances that led, besides him, what were some of the other things that were happening to make you get to that point where you said, I need Jesus in my own life?
Well, I was involved in that car accident in December of '78, and I just knew that when I was still in the hospital, I just knew that my wife was pregnant with our first child,
Okay.
my son Eric, and it was just one of them things where I knew God's hand had been upon me and saved me and brought me through that accident,
Yeah.
so I could be there for my son, and uh, it it just started on me there that I needed to make some changes and develop that relationship with God.
I want to talk about the car accident here in just a second, but I want to just ask, how did did you go to a church, or did you accept Christ at home, or
Uh,
when did you make, was it at the hospital?
it was pretty much at the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at that moment you realize,
Yeah.
okay, I need to,
Yeah.
trust in
Well,
Jesus.
as we talked before, I told you about the automobile accident when I was 10.
Yeah.
And, I grew up without a father as a result of it. And, I knew God had spared my life, so my son wouldn't have to live like that.
Yeah. Well, let's start there, because not everybody knew that. And I'm not asking you to go too far into the details of it, but you were traveling from Marietta with your dad at 10 years old. And then
Yeah.
would you care to just share a little bit about it?
Well, we were coming back home from Marietta. We'd been to Zide Sports Shop up there. And we got off the Belpre off ramp to come into downtown Belpre. And at that time, the toll bridge didn't have traffic lights, it just had stop signs. And semi ran through the intersection off the bridge at about 50, 55 mile an hour and crushed the car. And my dad was killed. And so, I grew up from 10 on without a father in my life. And I knew that when I was spared in 1978 in that accident, that
Yeah. And if you don't care, tell us a little bit about what happened. I know you shared that with me, but
well,
how that
I'd
accident happened.
been out of college about 6 months, and I was working for the power company. And coming home from work, I was coming down Emerson Avenue, and as we crossed the interstate, um, just this side of the interstate, a girl was coming home from work that worked at the mall. I think she was maybe 18 at the time. She lost control of her car and come across the line and hit me head on. And pretty much, well, the police report said they labeled the sections of the car like 1 through 8 or 1 through 9. And when they listed on the police report areas of damage, it was 1 through 9.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. Just like you said about your knees, and I'm sure you had other injuries as well, that they actually had to use the jaws of life to open up the
yeah,
vehicle to get to you.
yeah.
So I'm sure the recovery process was quite
Yeah,
extensive and long.
it took 6 months before I was able to really get up and walk, and I wasn't walking good. We went through the process of a walker and then crutches and then a cane, and then I was able to pretty much stand on my own.
Yeah.
The most difficult part was, believe it or not, going downstairs.
Really? I mean,
Yeah,
just because
because
your balance, or
the legs wanted to give out when you stepped down on them, and going upstairs wasn't hard, but going down was pretty tough.
I don't think people realize too how that recovery and stuff. It's you have to have a lot of courage and a lot of strength to kind of get through that time, because it can be very discouraging too when you're
Yeah.
not where you
Well,
want to be.
it's a lot of work, and you have to stay with it. But it can be frustrating.
Yeah. I like the idea that you shared, that in the moment in that hospital that you really felt like that, God had spared your life and given you this opportunity to be there for your son. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's always been, family's always been important to you because of what you experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. They're a gift from God.
Yeah. So, as you made that decision to come to Christ, what was your life like after you came to Christ?
Well,
How had things changed?
well, I don't know. I probably look at it a little different than some. You know, you know that after you accept Christ, that sometimes there are struggles. Well, you've changed camps, so to speak. You've went from following the world and the prince of this world, so he has no objection to
Yeah.
that, to following Christ. And the prince of this world has a lot of objection to that. And so that's a lot of times where the um, confrontation, so to speak, begins, because you've left one master and went to another. And so you experience maybe some turmoil that you didn't experience before. And you just have to make that commitment and stay the course, and Christ will see you through.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, to me, you are somebody that I've always looked to as being very wise. And I'm sure that's part of it. It's just that life experience that you've had that's helped you kind of grow in and understand the importance of making good decisions.
Yeah. Well, because of the situations I went through, I kind of grew up pretty young. And, like I told you before, after my mother passed away when I was 14, um, I lived with my aunt and my grandfather. And, my grandfather was born in 1890. And so he was of an older generation, and he didn't understand a lot of things that were there today in that day. And, so basically, I had to learn a lot, and I had to figure out a lot that, and I had to make recommendations to my aunt on what we were going to do, or what I thought we should do in circumstances and stuff. And it was different, but,
Yeah.
It was all for a reason.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting. You really had to become an adult faster than most people. And helping it sounds like your grandfather and your
Yeah.
aunt make decisions that normally would be the opposite.
Yeah.
And it sounds like because he came from a different time period.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much older was he when he went to live with him?
He would have been. He would have been in his 70s somewhere. I'm
Oh,
not sure exactly where, but it would have
yeah.
been in his 70s. Yeah, he passed away when he was 85, and I was 19.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, as you mentioned about losing your father, and then you lose your mother, and again, would you care? Because not everybody got to hear that about that experience of losing your mom at 14. I'm sure that was even more. I mean, both were devastating, I'm sure, but just having that happen. Did you ever ask, like, God, why is this happening to me as
Well,
a
I
teenager?
always wondered why, but, I knew that his ways are higher than my ways, and I didn't have to always understand. I just needed to believe.
Yeah.
Like I told you, I always knew he was there, and I always believed in him. I just didn't understand at that young age the significance of a relationship with him.
Yeah. I think that's a thing a lot of people miss out on too. They think that, yeah, I believe there's a God, but taking it to the point where no, God wants to have a personal relationship with you,
Yeah,
and you have a real relationship, not just
yeah.
a fake one. Or
Well, back in those days, I felt that you had to pray, but there was a certain way that was actually a prayer.
Mhm.
And now today, I understand that it's a conversation with God.
Yeah,
You know,
you
uh,
don't have to say the Lord's prayer every time.
no,
That
no,
it's a pathway to pray, but
right,
it doesn't have to have those same words. And I'm
yeah,
not saying it's bad to say that, but I understand what you're saying. It's
yeah,
that I can express what's here, and God understands that. And
that's right,
yeah,
yeah,
and I think that it's so great that you came to that revelation that that it is much more than that. And so, how did that affect you raising your kids? And let me back up for a second. How did you and Patty meet, if that's all right to ask?
um, well, it was just a coincidence. Back in those days, in the 70s and stuff, everybody had a CB radio, and everybody kind of hung out on a channel,
Uh-huh.
and you talked to people, and we were on the same channel. And then one day I said, well, you want to meet for an ice cream cone? And that's
So
how.
wait, you never met her before? You just
Never met
talked
her before. Never seen her before.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was different.
Yeah. Now, did she have a church background growing up too?
Yeah, she went here to Porterfield.
Oh, so she's been here for years at
Yeah.
Porterfield. 'Cause,
Yeah, it was an interesting situation. We came when we first got married. We came here to Porterfield for a while, and Chloe Spence was here, and she got us involved with a Sunday school class downstairs. Well, I didn't, as I told you, riding to work with my carpool buddy, we had a lot of kind of deep conversations about things in the Bible and stuff. And the guy that was teaching our Sunday school class, I thought he was way out there. I didn't think he adhered to the little bit more conservative, stricter view of what some scripture says. And so I told my wife, I said, well, we've got to look for another church. So we went to Calvary Community, and we went down to St. Mark's, and I don't remember now. We went to, 3 or 4 churches, and we'd try them for 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't know, it just kept tugging at me. And so I came back to Porterfield, and I've been here for almost 40 years now.
Test the waters out there, and then you came back.
Yeah.
And then was that person still teaching Sunday school, or did they move
No,
on?
he'd left.
Oh, good. So, one of the other questions I want to ask you is, what were some of the, let's start with the highs. What are some of the high or mountaintop experiences that you've had that God's brought you through, or things that you were just blessings that God did that you were kind of like, wow, that's just God?
Yeah, well, you'd have to fully understand the situation, but when I had my first heart surgery back in 2011, I was waking up in the coronary intensive care unit there, and I had this respiratory therapist that kept coming up and getting right in my face. I had these tubes down my throat, and he would tell me, you got to start breathing. You got to start breathing. This is like 10 o'clock at night. He says, you got to start breathing on your own so I can pull them tubes. And he was basically yelling at me because I wanted to go to sleep.
Yeah. Let me sleep.
And he was yelling at me. And anyhow, there was this woman who, it turns out, as I got to talk to her later, she was from Jamaica, but she worked there at the hospital. She cleaned in the coronary care unit there, mopped the floors and stuff, and she was leaning on a mop bucket. And I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, who is this lady, and what's she doing here? But anyhow, this guy keeps coming up and yelling at me to wake up, and it would kind of seem like it would be a down thing, but I'd made up my mind that if he'd come up and started yelling at me again, I was going to punch him in the face. Well, he come up and started yelling at me again, and I went to reach up, and they had my hands tied down, and I didn't know it. And I was really mad. I was really upset. And
yeah, you couldn't punch him.
and the problem was that the way the tubes were situated, when I tried to inhale, it sucked them against the back of my throat, and I couldn't inhale.
Oh, so you couldn't do what they were asking. Yeah.
I couldn't breathe, but I couldn't tell them.
They didn't know that, yeah.
And I couldn't tell them. Well, somehow I got my jaw back a little bit and was able to squeeze down on it and shove it forward with my tongue a little bit, and I was able to inhale. Well, I'm there, and it's almost like I'm hyperventilating. I'm breathing, and so then he pulls the tubes and he goes home. Okay. So the next day, I'm talking to this lady when she comes in at 3 o'clock to do her shift there at the hospital. And she said, yeah, last night, she said, you was laying there like a lamb asleep. And she said, they were hollering at you. And she says, I was praying for you. She says,
Oh,
I was praying for you with everything I had. And she said, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you just looked like a lion that started roaring. And and I realized that, that's how God works.
yeah,
You know, uh, it was just a strange situation that I had been at peace when I was asleep, and I wanted to go back to sleep and be at that peace. And when I opened my eyes, I could feel the weight of all the sin in the world. It just, it was like I woke up in a cesspool,
yeah.
and I just wanted to go back to sleep, but God allowed me to get angry because that lady was praying for me,
Yeah.
and he helped me to get through that situation.
It's always neat too to find other Christians in moments like that God sends our way that or sometimes there's chance meetings like that
Yeah.
nurse that she was praying for you that
Oh
time,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm sure her prayers were answered,
Oh yeah.
and your families too. I know your
Yeah.
family was praying for you, and we were praying for you as a church. But
Yeah.
it's neat to see how God sends people in the midst of those times too.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter who you are. There's going to be storms in your life,
Yeah,
and uh, I kind of visualize it like you're in a tornado, and everything's swirling around you. But in that tornado, God's there somewhere. Find him and get with him.
yeah, I like that. That's really good because none of us ask for the things that we go through, but it's a
No,
lot of times how we respond to those things and putting our trust in Jesus that is an opportunity for somebody else to be reached or
that's
touched
right.
or
That's right.
even encourage the family or people around us in the moment that they see Christ in us.
Yeah.
And it's neat to see how God's spared your life, protected you, and brought you through some of these difficult situations, that God's used you to be that beacon of hope and encouragement to your family, to the church, um, and to use the experiences you've had to keep pressing on.
Yeah. Well, the way I kind of look at it is, you asked me to come here and be a part of this and tell my story, but it's not really my story as much as it is the story of how, God's had his hand on me and carried me through
Yeah,
these things. It's his story.
yeah. Isn't that the amazing thing that all of us can be that, like if we allow him to work in our life, and even at times I know I haven't allowed him to work, that he's still able to tell his story.
Yeah.
Um, so, I know we've shared some of them, but is there any other valleys that you've been through that maybe we haven't shared yet? Some things that were kind of difficult or hard for you, or
Mm, I'm sure there are. None of them come to mind right now, Eric.
well, I will say this: is it all right to talk about Kayla being a surprise? I think you
Oh,
guys
yeah,
thought you were
sure.
done, and
Sure.
she's like a little blessing. But I'm sure at the time you're like, "What's going on here?"
Yeah. Well, um, she came late uh, in life to us.
Yeah, you guys thought you were done having a family,
Yeah,
that you had stopped, and
I've got my oldest son's 45, my oldest daughter's 43, and my youngest son is 41, and then Kayla's 30. Yeah, but she she was a blessing, and she having kids a little bit later in life keeps you young longer.
yeah. I think, as I think about Roman too, with his heart issue that he had, and I think he's doing well now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, does going through some of the things you've been through help you navigate the, things like that, that you understand that God's in
Well,
there?
it makes it easier, I think, a little bit. It's still difficult, but it makes it a little bit easier knowing that, you know, you've been through it and God was with you and he helped you and he was with Roman and he brought Roman through it.
Yeah. And I think it's comforting to know that God loves us all.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easy to forget that, but we ultimately know that because of the cross. But even seeing the things he does for us like that he spared
Yeah.
Roman, and
Yeah.
he's been with Roman, and just like he was with you.
Yeah. You know, so often we lose a little bit of our focus when the storms come on us.
Mm.
And, kind of like Peter, when he got out of the boat, he lost his focus and he started to sink.
Yeah.
And, then all of a sudden, as a last resort, we think, oh, well, I'm going to pray about this. You're getting your focus back a little bit and you're going to pray about it. It just amazes me sometimes how that, God always seems to be our last resort rather than our first resort.
Yeah.
And the good thing about it is that as long as we call upon him first, last, and always, he's there.
Yeah. So I'm sure it's a blessing knowing that God has given you such a tremendous family, and I know you're proud of all your kids and even your grandkids now.
Yeah.
Um, what's that experience like for you to have a family and it be pretty much a large family, with that many kids?
Yeah. Well, it was a challenge when they were growing up. The thing I tell when we teach that intentional parenting
Yeah.
class,
Mm-hmm.
the things I tell people is you can have 2 kids or 4 kids or 5 kids or whatever, and you can raise them all exactly the same, but they're all going to be different.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You treat them exactly the same, but they all look at everything differently.
Yeah. It's very true, and they have their own personalities,
Absolutely.
their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's just
There's not a cookie cutter mold for raising a kid. You just, you have to plot a course and try to stay the course, and you have to maneuver a little bit to the left or right, to deal with situations. But it's not a thing where because this worked with one, it's going to work with the other.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things, another thing I want to ask you is if there would be some things that you'd want people to take from your life and for them to know about you, what would be some of those things you'd like for people to know or take away from you?
Well, there's a reason for everything. God, we may not like it and it may not be our choice, but there's a reason for everything. So don't give up. Don't become frustrated. Don't turn and walk away from him, because there's a reason for everything. Everything works to the good for those who are called by his name, and he's there, and it's all going to work out.
Yeah. I like that it's all going to work out. Hearing it from you gives weight to that. You know what I mean? Like somebody could just say that, but for you to say it, you've been through it.
Well, I've been through a lot of things, and at each one, it's like a crossroads. You got to decide whether you're going to turn your back on him or whether you're going to walk towards him.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine how people that turn their back on him can get through things, how they make it.
You know, one of the other questions I have is, how has Porterfield been a blessing to you and your family? You know, how's the church here?
Well, it's like a big family, and family's a good thing.
Yeah.
There's people praying for you, people praying with you. There's other people going through situations like you did.
Yeah.
There's examples for you. There's people to talk to and to give you counsel and advice. And it's a good place to be.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing that we're all coming from different backgrounds and we all have our own issues. But if we keep Christ the main thing,
Yeah,
and come together under that heading, and I think that's. I want to tell you, I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate you being a part of the church, and it's been really good to get to know you even better. I think that all of us have a story to tell. And like you said, it's not just our story, it's God's story.
yeah.
And so I'm excited what the future holds. And, I know we've done a building project already, but hopefully we can
Do another one?
do another one here soon. But I also, before we end this, I do want to give you a chance to talk about money aspect, because I know that you come from that understanding of what it means to be a giver, and to understand that God's the one that gives, and we should be good stewards with what God gives us. So,
Yeah.
would you like to share a little bit about that?
Sure. When we first started going here, I thought, well, I'll put $5 in the plate. Then, then we started putting $25 in the plate. And the funny thing about that is, when we started writing that check and putting $25 in the plate, is we'd do that on Sunday, and then every Monday my wife would have to go down and transfer money out of savings to checking to cover that check. Well, probably a year went on, and I mean, this was back in the mid 80s, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A year went on, and then finally I made the decision. I was convicted that, we really just need to start tithing. And we started tithing, and from the day we started tithing, that money was always there and never had to go cover that check.
God kind of encouraged you,
Yeah.
hey, you need to take a little bit extra step of faith.
And I look at it today, and I've said this in business meetings when we've been talking about, projects and
Mm-hmm.
and money and stuff, that, I look at this church like it's just another room on my house. I have to pay the bills on my house,
Yeah.
and this is just another room on it. I have to help pay the bills on this room here.
Yeah.
I can't say, well, I don't use that bedroom, so I'm not gonna pay for the insurance on it, and I'm not gonna pay for the utilities on it. I have to do it because it's part of my house, and this is part of my house.
Yeah. And I like the fact too that what you're saying is you're not given to automatically receive things back, name it, claim it type thing, I guess.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say. But God is faithful that He'll provide. You're not going to miss that money if
No.
you don't have I think that's too the real issue is the concept that it's mine and not God's.
Yeah.
That I understand that I need to be faithful and just following God, and if God's calling me, and I think you'd also agree that it's kind of like God kind of gradually gets you there to kind of see that
Yeah.
he's okay with you doing a little bit at first, but that's not where he wants you to stay. He wants you to be fully trusting him.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I have learned over the years is that he can show you how to do more with 90%
Yeah,
than you could have ever done with 100.
exactly. If you allow him to work, he's going to work out those details, whether it's things aren't going to cost as much, or you're
Yeah.
going to be able to have
Well,
opportunities in the future because you were faithful in the present.
yeah,
In that moment.
back in those early days, we had kids that had tonsillitis and all these sort of things that, you was always running to a doctor for something. That kind of all went away.
Yeah,
And, you know, that freed up money and stuff. I mean, when I look back on it, I can see how things changed, but you didn't understand it as much right then
yeah,
when it was changing.
yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of people get a little sensitive when you talk about money, but I think it's important because that's another part of our faithfulness. Because it's going back to that relationship. It's not just I'm just going to give him this aspect of my life. It's
Yeah,
all of it.
yeah. You have to you have to put your money where your mouth is, I guess.
Well, thank you, Jim, for being here, and I thank you for sharing your story. Is there anything else that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you'd like to share?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, you know, thank you for sharing about your losing your mom and dad, because I had no idea. I don't think we'd ever got that deep to hear
Yeah,
about that, and I'm not sure that, as you said, it's kind of painful too in
yeah,
some ways.
yeah. It is.
Um, but to see how God's used your story and how God's protected you and still given you the ability to make a difference in your kids' lives and your family's life and the life of this church. Thank you for not giving up on Christ, and that it brought you to the point where you went deeper with your faith.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, glad to have you.
Yeah.